Welcome to the Monday, June 6th Education Committee and Supplementary Regular Board Meeting, where we will discuss the strategic plan implementation and where we are. So we're excited about the conversation that we'll have this evening. I'll turn the meeting, no, I'm sorry. I need to recognize the audience. Is there any public comment for agenda items only at this time?
Yes.
Okay, please, if you've signed, just please sign in with Ms. LaPera and join us at the microphone. If you could let us know your name and where you reside in the district. And there is a 3-minute time limit. Thank you.
We have Laura Hutner, Ellen Keefe, Harry Hummel, and Julie Gruber-May.
Hi, I'm Laura Hutner from Wynwood, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Amy Noor from Penn Valley. I want to comment on policy AR 213, which is the grading scale for student progress. Amy and I both support implementing the grading scale that puts us on a par with almost all other school districts, and doing it now so that it can be effective this fall. Our current grading scale puts our kids at a disadvantage. It supports high standards, but hurts them, not only in terms of college admissions, but more importantly, or as importantly, financial scholarships. A school that's granting merit-based aid by GPA isn't going to recognize that our A's are harder won. Adopting the College Board standard scales levels the field. Adding minuses to the scale addresses any concerns that the 10-point band is too wide and fine-tunes representation of students' work. After this issue came up at board and asked the superintendent meetings this year, Mr. Hughes convened focus groups of parents, students, and teachers to consider the topic in detail. Amy Noor participated in the parent focus group, and the parents initially had wide-ranging views on the topic. But after 2 hours of discussion, there was consensus that our current scale was inappropriate, and everybody supported the move to the College Board scale used by almost all other school districts. Student and teacher groups were similarly supportive. These conclusions, combined with Mr. Hughes' investigation of dozens of local Pennsylvania districts, several high-performing out-of-state districts, and multiple local independent schools, almost all of which use the College Board scale, provide a good foundation for our adopting the standard scale and doing it now to be effective in the fall. It costs nothing, it disadvantages no one, and it's a relatively simple and straightforward change. We're grateful to Mr. Hughes for his work on this issue, for Mr. Copeland and Dr. Eveslage, and the board for recognizing that this is the time to remedy any of the disadvantages, unanticipated though they might have been, to our kids from the current grading scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Ellen Keefe, Penn Valley, and parent of 2 Harriton seniors. I'm here to speak about agenda item that Dr. Eveslage will be presenting, AR 213 as well. But to begin, I would like to take a minute to publicly acknowledge the deep appreciation we and so many in our community have for Dr. Eveslage. My children were the direct beneficiaries of the 7 years he spent leading Welsh Valley and Harriton. And while I understand that the Harriton community is very disappointed to see Scott leave his daily role at that school, I know that in his larger role in the district, even more families will benefit from his, thoughtful and educated approach to creating the best environments for our students. I'm thrilled that he will be discussing AR 213 tonight because I know he understands the need to make positive changes for our students. Last November, I joined a large group of parents at your monthly meeting to raise 2 issues: the health issues surrounding sleep for adolescents and the fact that the Lmsb grading scale was not in line with our peer districts. I specifically made the point then, and will reiterate it tonight, that the Lmsb grading scale has financial implications, as colleges and universities use grades to award merit scholarships. With 2 college-bound children, I spent a large part of the last year immersed in their college application process. During the process, I learned a lot, but 2 interesting surprises for me were that there is so much merit scholarship money available for our kids, but unfortunately, Lmsb kids are placed at a disadvantage for these scholarships because of our existing grading scale. And to be honest, this is not something I appreciated until the college process began in my house and grades were being sent to a broader audience. An A in LM is not an A in the majority of school districts who utilize the College Board scale. As I sat with an admissions officer last summer at one college, I learned that a prospective student with a 90 or above average would be eligible for $17,000 per year merit scholarship, $68,000 over 4 years, basically the cost of 1 year at a private school. However, our existing grading system makes it impossible for an admissions officer to identify a student with a 90 or 91 average because it's a B plus in Lower Merion, though an A minus or an A in other school districts. Tonight you have the opportunity to alter our current grading scale and eliminate its detrimental financial effect, however unintentional it is. There is absolutely no reason LMSD needs to differentiate itself and its students on the basis of a grading scale that has negative financial implications for our students. This is one situation where I would love to see the district just do what everyone else does. We strive to be exceptional in all areas, but we do not need to be exceptional in this one. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Harry Hummel. I have 2 kids in the school system now and one who's already graduated. I don't know if I can really improve on the comments that our last 2 speakers made, but I'd just like to point out something that I've observed with my kids going through the college process. I took one of my kids to Princeton to go visit it, and I realized that there were 25 applicants for every position. So what you're expecting a college admissions officer to do is when they're piling through these hundreds and hundreds of applications to mentally make the change of basis that an A is 92 instead of 90. I think that's a really difficult thing to do. I was one of the people who was skeptical about this proposal. I was one of the people in the parents group. But the more I heard about it and the more I thought about it, I didn't see any way that any of our students are being disadvantaged by this. In numerous ways, I think they benefit from it. So I really can't see what the downside is of not moving forward with this. But just one more thing I'd like to do is, and I meant to start with this, I want to thank you for your participation in the school board. This is the first time I've ever spoken at a school board meeting, and it's actually kind of exciting. And I realize that you guys are doing this every week, and I apologize for never having been here before. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Julie Gruber May, and I have a daughter who is currently a junior at Lower Merion High School. So, like the parents before me, I have really have a huge awareness right now of what grading will mean to my child as she begins her journey through applying to colleges. And it is amazing to me that I really have kind of figured out the difference between the last 11 years where she has been in this 8-point scale to now the opportunity to being in a 10-point scale and being on par with all the other students that are going to be applying to school as she is. The thought that my financial aid, the thought that an admission process might be hampered by our current 8-point scale just seems like something that we should be able to correct, and to be able to correct without a whole lot of debate, because as the gentleman before me just said, it's one of those things that hurts no one and allows all of us to have great gain for our children. So as a parent of going down that journey next year, I fully endorse moving to the 10-point scale. Thank you.
And thank you. Okay. And now we will have a presentation by Dr. Hart from Belmont Hills.
Good evening, everyone. Let's see, where am I? Okay, great. Each year, we begin with a theme that sets the foundation for our work for the upcoming year. And so this past year, we decided on the theme of a tree. And not only are there a million trees sort of around Belmont Hills and also displayed in the building, but it seemed like the perfect symbol to capture the idea of strength, flexibility, particularly during difficult times, the idea of sharing gifts, and this notion of constantly growing and evolving. And so I thought, what would be a really great way for us to be able to share this image with our students and staff and community. And I came across this poem, Advice from a Tree. Stand tall and proud, go out on a limb, remember your roots, drink plenty of water, be content with your natural beauty, and enjoy the view. it is what I hope for myself, for our staff, for our children, and for our community. And that has been our theme for this year. I share that with you this evening because as I sort of prepared for my presentation, which will promise not to be too long, wanted to think about ways in which we've gone out on a limb and taken some risks and tried some new things. So I'm going to share those things with you. But I also wanted to share some of the activities that take place that are very much Belmont Hills and really show the way in which we're kind of grounded in our tradition. It'll be impossible to talk about all the things that we've done this year. And so I try to pick vignettes that I think are important, capture who we are, but also just sort of make me smile and make me really proud to be part of the school community. In the spirit of the strategic plan, I tried to organize the ideas and the images that I'm going to share with you through this idea of collaboration and creativity, critical thinking, culture, and community. The idea of increasing student voice, transforming the experiences that boys and girls have as well. And when I did that, I realized there's this really dynamic overplay and interplay between all of these ideas. And so while I have organized them one by one, I realized they could have gone in any one of these characteristics. And so if I had 5 more minutes to organize and revamp my presentation, I probably would have gotten rid of the captions, but you'll get an idea of them. So this idea of collaboration. There are two areas I really want to focus on. One is this idea of makerspace. Our gifted support teacher, Barbara Johnson, has really taken on this idea of kind of maker mentality and really shared it with lots of different groups of children and staff members. And the one group that I've loved that she has sort of embraced is this idea that she's working in collaboration with learning support teachers to have children kind of come into this space and kind of redefine how they see themselves as learners and creators and really help them sort of see themselves in a very different light. The second collaboration that took place this year is a STEM mentoring program that we did with the Power Group from Harrison High School. I've been trying for the past couple of years to have a mentoring program for African American biracial children at Belmont Hills, and I could never quite get it together. And then Nate Banto said, listen, we're going to make this happen this year, and then with the support of Dr. Eveslage, who was able to provide transportation for the high school students, we had 4 to 6 students from Power come for the entire month of April, and we engaged in problem-solving activities, some science, what science facts do you know, and then we ended with doing some hoverboard activities where the kids actually mentored our children, the older children with younger children to actually create them. I was shocked by the fact that not all the students in my school knew one another, but they also sort of ended that experience by looking forward to having Mr. Banto in high school and looking forward to seeing themselves as scientists. And so that collaboration, 4 hours in a month for a couple of the kids really kind of changed how they saw themselves and what it would look like for them to be going to high school, which was really very exciting. Junior Olympics is an integral part of kind of who we are, but I highlight this because the kids did incredibly well, and not that they just did really well, but for this year, the kids who were doing the tug of war were kids who, for the most part, didn't know each other incredibly well, didn't get together very often, but for this particular task, worked together and did an incredible job and really won. And so this idea that we have these big moments of celebration, but this one moment that took, 60 seconds, really helped to kind of redefine sort of the end of the experience for the boys and girls in 5th grade. I could not help but speak on the incredible collaboration and partnership with our HSA, providing lots of really wonderful opportunities for our boys and girls to extend curricula. Creativity. You'll see this bubble activity is a partnership with our kindergarten and 3rd grade students. It's actually a reverse mainstreaming setting where we have 3rd grade children actually spending time in our full-time AS classroom, which has been an incredible experience for all the children that are involved. We have a genius hour in 1st grade where kids just take an opportunity 1 hour a week just to create and play and think about very common materials and activities from very different perspectives, and having children just explore. Many of you saw on the website that we had a partnership with the art students at Lower Marion High School with the Charming Bracelet Project. And once again, our students had an opportunity to hang out with high school kids, which if you have older children, doesn't seem like a big deal, but for our children, it really is. The idea of taking the bus to Lower Marion High School, seeing the work that the boys and girls had actually created, and sharing some of their own reading and writing was really a fabulous opportunity as well. critical thinking. We have 3 teachers who are participating in the STEM project with Nancy Acancia Mesa, and so they not only are running our after-school program, but they're also collaborating during the school day so that the 4th grade children have an opportunity to kind of experience what it is that they're learning about in the afternoon. And one of those projects was a solar panel project, which was incredible fun, and kids learned quite a bit as well. One of these moments that just kind of make me smile is the idea that in our 1st and 2nd grades in kindergarten, we celebrate this idea of patterning in the 100th day of school in lots of different really creative and innovative ways. For 4 years, we have had a stock market club at Belmont Hills, but this is the very first year that one of our parents, Dr. Sharma, who works at St. Joe's, actually said, I'd be happy to help you with that project by inviting college students to come at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning for 15 weeks. So anybody who's a college student know that's a big deal. They came enthused, excited, and it really had our own children really excited as well. And last week, we were able to go to St. Joe's where the children were actually given certificates for participation. And there's this really cool room in one of the buildings at St. Joe's. It's like being, I don't know, like on Wall Street. It feels like you're like in the stock market, and they actually got to work with college students to kind of go through that process. And so a brief conversation, one Friday afternoon created a really wonderful opportunity for kids to really think about the world from a very different perspective and financial responsibility as well. The Egg Drop Project is one of my favorite ones that we do, and the idea of just thinking about how do we demonstrate our knowledge in very different ways, getting outside, talking to one another, exploring and creating. Culture and community. French Market is a staple at Belmont Hills, and for those of you that are familiar with the school community, recognize that. So we have 5th graders who have an opportunity to take on the persona of famous French people and answer questions that are being asked. But it's also an opportunity where our 2nd graders sing, 3rd and 4th graders have an opportunity to host sort of the market piece. But the piece, so that's the important part about culture, but the piece about community that I love is that we probably had more than 100 parents who were coming to it because they love it so much. And a grandfather of one of our students who is French, and he comes and he plays the accordion every year, and he tells me, doesn't matter how long my children are here, I will always come back and play at this event. And so it captures this idea of community and really being a part of something bigger than just you. We have the continuum of services for children who receive autistic support services, and we have a variety of activities and events, but the thing that I'm most proud of is that children, regardless of where they are on the continuum or what their needs are honored and celebrated every day in really authentic and meaningful ways. And so there are children in kindergarten who may have never met someone quite like the child sitting next to them, but they're comfortable with them, they're friends with them, and they're people that they want to have play dates with. And for me, that really captures this notion of community. We are very fortunate that Al Gephardt grew up in the area, and we have a 4th grade intergenerational day, and he invites his mom and his aunt and 2 of their friends one day every spring to come and talk about what it means to have lived in this area for the past 60, 70, 80 years. And so one of the gentlemen actually, other people bring lots of cool trivia and things, but he actually brought this really cool car, and the kids could not wait to really be able to spend some time kind of getting inside and walking around. Japanese tea ceremony, another tradition of Belmont Hills, and once again, it's something that celebrates culture, but the community piece for me is that we had a family that moved the first day of the PSSA, so kind of as a 3rd grader, so you're like, whoa, welcome to Belmont Hills, we're gonna take a test in 5 minutes, but she saw the Japanese writing on the wall and said, listen, I'd love to be able to come and talk about my experiences living in Japan. And her daughter, who would not say 3 words, about a month ago came and actually shared her experiences with our 1st grade students as well. So this idea of sharing traditions and culture as well. And last but certainly not least, we do have a community potluck at the end of every year, which is really a focus on our culture. People bring their favorite foods from their culture, their traditions, and it's a way for us to kind of break bread and get to know one another. We start each year with the potluck within each grade level, and it's a really wonderful way to kind of come full circle when we all come together and share food that's really important to us as well. So I'm hoping that these vignettes give you a sense of kind of who we are as Belmont Hills, ways in which we're grounded in our school community, and ways in which we've grown and evolved in the past 170 some days. So thank you for the opportunity to chat with you. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Our next presentation is a continuation of the discussions that we've been having all year about the exciting work being done on the strategic plan. This evening, we want to provide you with an update and give you some indications of some products that we've been able to come up with and a future of what we look to do. So I think Dr. Everslag and Ms. Schaefer, and we've got a few people who are going to chime in while they're getting set. I just wanted to say we only have one slide on the logic model.
That's true.
But we're going to get one in.
Thank you. I can do that. Thanks. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back here in front of you to share where we are and give you some more details, basically building on where we left off with you. And as usual, this will be a team approach. We're all about team when it comes to the strategic plan, so I'm happy that many colleagues are here tonight to share what each of them has been up to with their teams, and together with our leadership teamwork, we hope that we answer maybe some lingering questions that you have in our time together this evening. So as an overview, we'll be working through sort of an update from the last time we talked. We'll be talking about in greater depth what our leadership teams and pathway teams have been doing year to date. So this is really an overview of 15-16 work and the thinking that has been ongoing around what to prioritize, where to go, and with that, where we'll be ending up this year, the work we'll be doing with our consultants. We'll touch on that as well. And then finally, we'll bring you up to speed on our research and development team. So that's a bit of an overview, and to get things started, since we last were with you, which is at the top of the slide there on May 9th, we gave you an update, talked to you about that logic model, which was an opportunity for us to really think about this really robust plan that we created, that we're all very excited about, that really, I think, grounds us in establishing what our core values and vision is for the future, but it's a lot, and we have to identify within that structure what are we going to prioritize and how are we going to prioritize the work. So we did share that with you, and that was through the logic model that we introduced. We've also, just to give you a sense of some other updates that we've given to our ISC, we did reconvene our steering committee, shared with them the logic model, got feedback from them, and so on. So, since we last met, we've continued our work and are at this time planning for our time together with our consultants at the end of June, so that we can further frame the priorities that we've established and that we'll talk about this evening, and we're excited to get that started. Again, just as a refresher, the idea was that we have this a lot of ideas and activities and things that are really great, and we'd like to do them all, but that's obviously impossible. So this is the one slide you'll be getting, again, just as a refresher, and the idea that this is the thinking, and it's not easy, and there's a lot of discussion and debate and struggle, but I think at the same time, this gives us a map, a roadmap, and a way to identify where ideas fit within the framework of the plan. So this is an important document to us. We're not going to talk about it in any greater detail than just to refresh your memory of that. And then,
but you need to remember exactly what was on that slide. And
right, there'll be a
to,
test.
Yes.
And I'm going to
pass the mic over to Mr. Potton to talk to you in a little bit greater detail about the work of the leadership team.
Good evening, everyone. The leadership team, I'm going to just move ahead, has been working since September. And I will say that I remember specifically when Mr. Copeland called me, I can't speak for everyone else, and he asked if I would want to participate. And his next words were, "It's going to be a lot of work." And he was right. But it's been good work, and it's been exciting work. And I think you can ask anyone that's a member of the team in terms of the year that we've had and the progress that we've made. So we meet regularly every Monday morning at 8 o'clock since September, and there have been additional meetings throughout the year where we've gotten together to focus and organize some specific items. Some of the work that we've accomplished, you can see written there, specifically around organization of the pathway teams. But I think it's really important to point out that a lot of the work that we've done has been to develop that shared understanding, not only with, first amongst ourselves as the leadership team, but also then helping to filter and support the pathway teams as they move ahead. Once the pathway teams were organized, a lot of our work has shifted to guide and support each pathway team, by helping them to prioritize the work and making sure that what they're working on is focused on high leverage, high value, and scalable items. As we move forward, you can see that our product is looking at a coordinated, measurable, and feasible implementation plan. And so, again, continuing to support the work of the consultants and the pathway teams together. Specifically, we have the meeting coming up in June with our consultants. Next, we're going to hear multiple reports from each of the pathway teams. But before turning it over to them, what you should know is that each of the teams, as they speak about the products and items that they're bringing forward, are looking through the lens of, is what they are working on in support of self-directed learning, creative productivity, and global citizenship. These are the items and areas that we've identified that if it is not connected to those areas, then it's not something that at this time we would be supporting or moving forward with. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pratt. There she is. With our first pathway team.
So, good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak very briefly about the idea of transformative curriculum. And before I speak to the specifics of the slide, I did just want to revisit two important ideas that we talked about back in December when we were thinking about the notion of what do we mean by curriculum and what do we mean by transformative, because those working definitions of the term are really guiding so much of the work of the pathway team. When we're thinking about curriculum, to remember that we're thinking about it in terms of a set of experiences, the lived experiences of students in the classroom every day. And we had talked about the etymological roots of curriculum as a current or a stream, a set of actions that someone participates in. And so when we're thinking about curriculum, we're thinking about it in terms of verb rather than noun. And so when Mr. Potton talks about this idea of shifting stance and talks about a shared understanding, that's one of the central shared understandings that we're really working towards in some of our work right now. The second definition that I just wanted to revisit is this idea of something that is transformative. And when we invoke the word transformative, we're invoking it on two levels. We're thinking about something that is transformative in that something is different from what it once was. And so by the time we are moving forward ultimately with our vision for curriculum, there's going to be something palpably different about the curricular experiences that students will have. And this second sense of transformative is the learners who participate in this transformative curricular experience are different at the end of the experience than they were at the beginning. If someone thinks the same at the beginning of a course than they did at the end of a course, then we have to raise questions about the transformative nature of their experience. So those two words are worth revisiting because they really are touchstone pieces. As you can see from this slide, our team is also a robust team. We have pulled teachers from elementary, middle, as well as the secondary level. And one of the things that I think is really worth highlighting is we've had 6 formal scheduled meetings where we have met whole team since November, but there have also been multiple opportunities for subgroup work. So sometimes there is an idea that is discussed whole group that needs to be developed more deeply, that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more thoroughly. And so often people will take that work in a subgroup, and then come back to the large group meetings. In terms of our process, we start it by really thinking about what is our charge over the course of this year. What is it that we would like to do between the beginning of the year and the end of the year? And so we began by thinking about what are some actionable steps? How do we take this amazing, awesome, inspiring strategic plan and make it actionable? What are the ways that we can make this part of the lived experience? That was our first question, and it's actually a question that we come back to each time this particular pathway team meets. Once we ask that question, we pulled together around 5 broad ideas, and those are the 5 broad ideas that are addressed in that bullet point. And then once we had those 5 broad ideas, we asked ourselves, how can we take those ideas and try to make them real? Where we are right now in terms of our work on the transformative curriculum pathway is we have developed 6 potential outcomes, 6 potential pieces that we are working towards. The first is where we are investing a lot of our time and focus right now, mostly because it is the place where we are hoping to draw from the expertise of our consultants. And so when we are talking about developing a dynamic curriculum that's aligned to PA core, that is interdisciplinary in focus, and that integrates service and global experiences for all students, what we're saying is, how can we take the curricular experiences that we currently have and develop a set of protocols to look carefully at them in light of what we say the strategic plan values? And that's some of the work that the consultants, when they revisit with us in late June, are going to help us wrestle through. And then once we have that thoughtful protocol to go back and to look closely and deeply at the curricular experiences we're already providing for students, to ask questions, what pieces are working, what pieces do we want to hold on to, and then what pieces do we need to tweak, what pieces do we need to revise, and then what pieces do we need to add? To ask honest questions about what are the spaces of absence. Connected to that idea of thinking differently about curriculum are outcomes 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so over the course of this year, we have, in subgroups, started to think about opportunities for student innovation and creation. And some of that involves something like the Global One program and how that gets enacted and how we're thinking differently about the study of social studies and how we're thinking differently about the discipline of history. Some of that involves some of the STEM work that we see happening at the elementary grades around the idea of makerspace and maker mentality that Dr. Hart had referenced. We're also thinking about the idea of disciplines that link thematically and are connected to out-of-school experiences. So asking questions about how are we able to tap into work of a community network, which is something that Mr. Young will speak about when he is pulling his slide together. And to also think about the idea of interdisciplinarity, where it's not just 2 areas of content dancing with each other, but we're thinking about what do students need in terms of multiple areas of understanding in order to be able to wrestle through a question or a problem independently. We're thinking about the idea of global experiences, and we're dancing with the delightful paradox of you can have global competencies developed through even local experiences if we shift from a culture of me to a culture of we. And what does that mean to try to invoke a culture of we? And so that is work that's in its very nascent stage, but there are conversations that are starting in terms of the pathway. The idea of thinking about students being able to specialize in a topic. You'll see on the logic model the discussion around capstone projects and what might it look like to have a capstone project at each grade. So the beginnings of those conversations are also there. And then thinking about the notion of publishing and presenting each year, and the idea of sharing your work with an audience larger than just a teacher. That if we have great ideas are meant to be shared, they're meant to be made public. So how do we cultivate that culture of publication and presentation? And so in light of all of this thinking and questioning, that's where we are right now as we prepare for our work with the consultants in late June. So, and then in light of that, I will reintroduce Mr. Potton.
Hello again. I've had the opportunity to work with and serve on the student-driven pathway team, along with Ms. Frazier, who's here, and you can see all the members that are listed. I think it's important to note that we wanted to make sure we included students as part of that. And as I walk through this, one of the other things that I think is important to note is when we first went to the steering committee in January, it looked very different in terms of the direction we were heading. And we heard from the steering committee members as well as students who participated on the steering committee and sort of shifted how we were going to move forward with collecting student voice. So what we have done over the last, for the year was focusing on student voice and collecting that. And as you read through the plan, that's a big piece of our pathway. How we wanted to do that, and we were trying to do it globally at first, was looking at a survey, but the steering committee sort of said to us, just talk to people. So, and that's what the kids told us. The kids said, just talk to us. So we have started and begun to put in place the beginnings of a system to sit down and talk with students in focus groups and get their thoughts and ideas around what school should look like and what is it that they see, what is it they like, what is it that they, their experiences have led them. And we started those this week. Our first focus groups actually began today. We're starting with elementary and middle school. The feedback I got from those groups is that it was really great. There was often concern in terms of the students from the staff that the students would not be speaking up, that they'd be afraid because there were some staff that they may not recognize. But both of the groups told me today that they were very engaged. They were very much forthcoming with their ideas, and they really appreciated participating and being a part of it. So as we have gone through our meetings, that was our goal. You can see that we first, again, as Dr. Pratt had spoken to, making sure we're all on the same page with that shared understanding and knowing what we're moving forward towards. The focus has been gaining that student voice. We had training take place with Dr. Paul, and now we are in the process of getting that voice, gathering that data. We'll be sitting down to talk as a group next week to then share it with a larger audience, which we hope will then help inform and drive the other pathway teams as well in terms of where they're heading. We intend to then sit down with high school students. We had hoped to do high school students this spring. We were advised that that was not a good time of year for them with finals. So we avoided that, and we plan to do that in the fall. And again, that is the beginning of a system. It will also help to inform us to develop a survey that asks the right questions. And that will begin a systematic approach to gaining student voice throughout. The other piece that we hope to that we have looked into and we hope to move forward on is the idea of mentoring, a full-scale mentoring program for all students, how we can put that in place. We've begun to look into that, as Dr. Pratt had mentioned with the Community Resource Network as well, that Mr. Young's going to speak to, sort of working with our community as to how best approach such a venture. So I will next introduce Mr. Cody.
Good evening, everyone. Our Redefining Success Pathway team consists of 16 members. We have 2 students who serve on our pathway team, providing very valuable input into looking at how we redefine success, as well as a group of parents, teachers, and administrators. So we started off our year with a few meetings. We've held 5 formal meetings as a full pathway team, as well as holding smaller subcommittee meetings with pathway leaders, just as the transformative curriculum pathway team has done. And we started looking at a great deal of student wellness, looking at social emotional well-being of students, looking at the practice of mindfulness in the classroom. We also talked about grading. We talked about looking at a more focused feedback report card, progress report of students. The other thing that we also are currently taking a look at is the way that we measure students and their progress within a benchmarking system. That's been discussion going on. And really our focus, we're really looking to take the lead from the transformative curriculum and what transformative curriculum establishes within their pathway team, so that we could have a fair measure of students, of how they're not only performing on state assessments, but also how they're performing in alignment with the curriculum. So much of our focus right now is looking at how we can provide more concise feedback to parents and students, and we're doing that by looking at the way we maybe possibly redesign the elementary and middle school progress report as a start, where we can really provide feedback on the skills and competencies that students display in particular subject areas. The example that I want to give is we have students on a spectrum that miss school for several reasons, and sometimes those absences occur at great lengths. And one of the ideas that we talked about in our pathway team is, how do we really know what a student doesn't understand? And this year we spent a lot of time talking about misconceptions of what do we know students know, or what do we know that they don't know. And if we have a more formalized way of providing specific feedback on skills and competencies, rather than just providing a grade, that feedback is so valuable to the student in terms of where they actually are within a curriculum and how they measure within the skills and competencies. So we've worked to develop a real understanding of trying to formalize language and really think about how all of the pathway teams are working, because redefining success, we've looked at how we can redefine success within a transformative curriculum. How are we redefining success in terms of student-driven? So we sort of look at our pathway team branching out to each of the other pathway teams and trying to find out ways that we can identify or redefine success in those other pathways as well. So our proposed plan of action is really taking a look at a revised K-12 assessment and reporting system, and that will be our focus. And our next steps are looking to take inventory and review those current assessments and feedback protocols in working with our consultants come the end of June. And with that, I'll move on to professional learning.
So our Pathways' big idea is to transform our approach to professional learning through collaboration in service of all forward's desired impact. In order to begin the process, we assembled a really capable, outstanding team of K-12 educators to create an action plan. Highlights of our Pathway team's process are listed for you up there, and include consensus building around the Pathway's intent, its organization, its language, and the plan's interconnectedness. We took a good look at ourselves and our experiences, what we found to be effective professional learning practices, things that yielded high levels of learning. We also looked outward at available literature, And through that process of looking inward and looking outward, we did a lot of grappling with ideas, but where we landed with that is an action plan that we were able to sequence strategies and to prioritize them. Essentially, our pathway strategies center around structures for and content of professional learning, and that culminates in a coordinated plan to help achieve all forward's desired outcomes. Because we know when our teachers are learning, so are our students. Our priority going forward, our next steps for the summer and for the year ahead, are to focus on horizontal and vertical infrastructures for professional learning that are collaborative and job embedded.
All right. Good evening. The Spirit of Community Pathway team is focused around maximizing the community resources that we have available to us and making sure that we're utilizing those to further other aspects of the strategic plan. So we have actually convened a variety of groups this year, which I'll touch upon the Community Resource Network Advisory Board, but leaders of community organizations that are connected to the schools, like the ISC, Scholarship Fund, Education Foundation, folks who are involved and closely working as partners of the district already, as well as some community-minded folks who are involved in our schools in other ways. One of the things that we wanted to do throughout this process was kind of take an inventory of the community resources that we have available to us and create some greater connection and collaboration. So among and between those groups, we have convened some conversations and have talked about kind of aligning resources and maximizing resources among and between kind of the existing school partners. So we have spent a great deal of time, our primary focus, around the launch of a community resource network. And you may be familiar with this if you've been coming to some of our communications and community engagement meetings. But essentially what we're doing is we're creating a network of volunteers who are available to provide their expertise, knowledge, and advise the district or provide kind of classroom support for school initiatives. And so kind of creating that network has required kind of the development of an advisory board, and as well kind of beginning to identify some examples in the community, in our school community, where staff may need some support request support for things that are occurring in the classroom. So we have some examples of that from this year in connecting our teaching staff with experts in the community. One example at Lower Merion High School this year, they had a coding competition, so we were able to find folks in the community who had planned coding competitions previously and then connected those individuals with the teacher who was developing the event, which made the event much more robust. And those are the kinds of programs and opportunities that we want to continue to kind of expand upon and enhance with a larger, kind of more formalized network. One of the things that we feel is really important, kind of in getting this system, kind of this process systematized and off the ground, is there has to be a place for folks to enter their information, where we're going to be able to kind of keep track of that information. So we've been in the process of reviewing volunteer management applications. We looked at a couple, one that we felt comfortable with, but had some limitations. So we're going to be looking at a couple more as one of our next steps. But it's important that folks have a place that they can go to where they know that they can share this information, that our staff can then review it and then begin to make matches between our experts in the community and our specific needs. And also, I think it's important to note that as folks who spoke before me mentioned, that we can begin to align these folks with specific needs in different pathway areas. As we kind of think about transformative curriculum, as we think about redefining success, and each pathway team is developing their list of priorities, are there folks in the community in our network who can help kind of think through some of these challenges and also can help support the work as it gets implemented at the school level. So the product that I think we're pretty proud of at this point is this new community resource network. We haven't had anything like this in the district. We think moving forward, being able to tap into alumni, tap into community members, parents who can provide that expertise, not just on an ad hoc basis, but really systematized, is going to be something that's going to be a great first step in kind of creating that greater level of community engagement. And the volunteer management application we hope to select this summer and align that with the volunteer policy, the new volunteer policy, which folks are receiving information about actually today. And then the other piece to this, and I think another important piece in kind of engagement, is maximizing our alumni resources. And one of the things that we've talked about this year with the Education Foundation, the Alumni Association, is taking this amazing network of alumni who we have some information for and creating a system to track and update information. Unfortunately, we lost that process a few years ago when the Alumni Association lost their vendor. But the Education Foundation is interested in this information as well. The district is interested in it. So our next step is to coordinate all three groups around the collection and maintenance of that information. So having the data, having the personal information is kind of our top priority, so we can take an inventory of what we have and then kind of build on that moving forward. And then areas of focus.
Okay, so you heard a lot about the work we've been doing in the pathway teams, and sort of going back to the work of the leadership team is to take and listen to all of these great ideas and all of the hard work and investment of the folks that are on those pathway teams. And I should mention that those are, our staff is volunteering their time to be there after school hours and meet in those teams and continue the work. So they're very, a very invested group of individuals, and so, publicly thank and recognize them for their time. And so part of the difficult work we have is to identify among all of those great ideas is the work that surfaced for us, and that's going to become the priorities for our work moving forward. So this essentially takes what you just heard and those product goals and sets them out here. And these are the same identified areas of focus that we took to the steering committee recently and had them provide us with some feedback. And we're confident that these are the right areas of focus for us moving into 16-17. Even among these areas of focus, we still have to narrow it when we talk about how do we prioritize the work of our consultants, for example. So our consultants are coming to work with us, as we mentioned, and several of us have mentioned earlier, in June. And so among those areas of focus, we've said, okay, what we need to do in light of our highlighting or identifying the transformative curriculum as being our lead focus. Our goal, our workshop goal with our consultants is to really dig into that curricular focus area and say, what do we need to accomplish, what do we need to do, and what do we want to walk away with in June having done. And so we wanted to share this with you just to give you an idea of the work we're doing with consultants and the back and forth that we have with them, and sharing with them, here's our goal and here are the guiding questions that we'd like them to consider in framing the work, those 2 days of work with us. So that's just there for your information, and again, identifying that narrow focus that we sort of have to come to so that we can actually move forward with the work. And the one last piece we wanted to share with you tonight is where we are with our research and development team. Dr. Paul?
Last but not least.
No, of course not.
Good evening, everyone. So the purpose of the research and development team is to provide information, research-based information, that can inform the conversations around different topics and ideas from All Forward, to inform the decision-making process, and to inform the action plans that are going to move these ideas into tangible products and actions. So when I arrived 3 months ago, I came to the leadership meetings weekly, faithfully, and after about 4 or 5 weeks, I said, I keep hearing all of you talk about the research and development team. Can I ask who is on the team? They said, well, you are. And here I am. So as I learned more and more about the plan and where the work was and where it needs to go, I conceptualized these 3 different functions for the R&D team. The first function is to provide snapshot information. So there will be topics that are priority topics, hot topics, or areas of bright spots where the team just needs more information so that they can have informed conversations. So in that function, I will be providing snapshots of where that topic stands at this point in time. What does the research say about this topic? And what are the current practices in Lower Merion regarding this practice or this topic area? The next function is a deeper dive into information, and this is where we'll be truly forming teams and work groups. The R&D work groups will be formed to investigate topics that are prioritized by the leadership team and to provide information that will help them make decisions and think about as it could be. What could this look like in our district, given the different types of evidence that we will pull together? And I want to fast forward to a slide here. In terms of making decisions, I look at 3 different types of evidence that I think are important and useful for people who need to make good decisions. The first is the research information. What does the research say? What does the best available research say? Because not all research is high quality, and just because something is published doesn't mean it necessarily will relate to our context. So what does the best available research say as it relates to our context here in Lower Merion? The second type of evidence I want to pull together is experiential evidence. What has been the experience of other people who have tried these practices? What are the experiences of those people who have these programs up and running already in the schools within Lower Merion or in neighboring schools? What can we learn from practitioners in their application of the topics and ideas? The final set of evidence is the contextual evidence. This is information that is needed to understand how this practice would apply here within our district, with our policies, with our state regulations and mandates, with our socio-political culture, and with the values of this community. Just because the research says it is a promising practice, and experience says that it's a promising practice, it doesn't mean that it's a perfect fit for Lower Merion. We need to understand what contextual factors are influential in making a good decision about moving forward with a practice or a program. So those are the 3 types of evidence that our work groups will be pulling together to inform the leadership team and the pathway teams and the steering committee to inform their decision-making processes. The third and final function for research and development is to act as a consultant, to work with the pathway teams as they are designing data collection and analysis strategies. I'll be there to go out and work with their teams, as I have with the student-driven pathway. They wanted to start systematizing student feedback. They wanted to go with focus groups. So I went and spent 2 hours with them, actually 3 hours, several sessions with them, to talk about how to organize focus groups and how to be a good facilitator of focus groups. We'll next be looking at how do we analyze all of that rich qualitative data once it's all collected. So I can act in that capacity as a consultant for methods and procedures for collecting and using information. So with that, we are finished with our overview of where we have been and where we are going, and we would be very happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Before I open it up to the board, Mr. Copeland, could you just share with the board and the community the process that you went through, obviously coming in new with the already completed strategic plan signed off by the board, in terms of this implementation phase and the kinds of things that you took up in terms of getting us to this point?
So one of the things that I tried to do was take the great ideas that had already been developed and say, how can we put this into an actionable process? I used the term, at some point we have to move from poetry to prose. It actually has to turn into something that we can put our hands on and touch and feel. And that means coming up with some process by which we can say, yes, this fits into our strategic plan, or no, this may be a good practice, but it really doesn't move the particular plan forward. That's why it was really incredible to work through the second thing that was necessary was to look at the pathways and say, okay, you have to be careful that they operate in silos. These are interrelated kinds of things. How are you going to make them interrelated and make them work in the district? It was really important for us to have a model of our own that allowed those things to come together. Now, you're going to give me a lot of grief for this, but the logic model helped do that.
And it's supposed to be. We get the messiness. I certainly get that as a researcher myself, but it is a bit overwhelming.
It is. But but that's allowed to be a screen, and allowed us to move forward. So now what's going to happen is we've got some folks with a national reputation who are coming in. The metaphor that I use for it is, you may have seen the cartoon of the guy who comes out of a restaurant, we'll say, and he's lost his car keys, and his friend comes out and he sees him under a street light and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm looking for my car keys." And he says, "You left them over here by the street light?" He goes, "No, I left them over there." "Well, why are you looking over here?" He says, "Well, that's because we're here where the light is." The purpose of the consultants is to say, it's okay, I'm going to show you where to look for things. They may be in the dark. They may be in areas that you don't have experience in. We want to bring those experiences to you in ways that you can make some decisions in Lower Merion whether you want that to fit. That means looking at a variety of different kinds of approaches in education. One of the things that that I wanted to make sure that the strategic plan included was pedagogy. And those things that matter in our science, in our field of education, and they weren't readily accessible, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to do that.
Thank you. I'll open it up to questions. Ms. Ackman? And then Dr. Gilbert.
First. Yes. Great to get the updated progress report, and I do agree you can really see how things are starting to synergize among the pathways, so that's great. I have a question/suggestion, and it's probably already come up, and it's based a little bit on me search, so I apologize, but I happen to have a 6th grader at BC, so who's currently in Evolve, and those programs, are always oversubscribed, and there's a lottery, and certain kids get in, or they don't, or they get in and they choose not to do it because their friends aren't in it, or all that stuff. And the teachers who are doing those programs at BC and Welsh Valley obviously are very experienced and have a whole strategy for how they integrate curriculum. As part of the transformative curriculum, one thing that I think could be interesting to explore is how to bring like a pod of that to each student, whether or not they're doing those programs. So one quarter, they get a mini version of it in, some topic area, just so that every student, whether or not that's their preferred way of learning or not, for some students, that's ideal for them, and for some, they'll feel uncomfortable, but I think that's good because people are getting pushed to really engage in their learning. So I just wanted to understand if that had been discussed, or I'm just trying to think of ways to make that approach more accessible, which I think is a great, example of where we're trying to get to.
So that is a good example. When I first got to the district and was touring the facilities and going in and out of classrooms, and I saw the interdisciplinary approach in the middle schools, I said, well, looking at the strategic plan and looking at some of this, why would this not be the default approach as opposed to a selected approach? And what the administration was saying to me, well, a couple of things. One, the way it's currently constituted, it really depends on dual certification of teachers. Not everybody has that.
Right.
And secondly, not everybody likes the particular way it's done. I think, however, that's a perfect example of a program to say, okay, maybe in its present form, it's not universal enough. But maybe that's a place to begin to look to make sure that we haven't eliminated it as a default program, because its form may look different. But the seed is a good place to begin. I would also say that's one of the things we wanted to look at was, what are we currently doing that's good but not scalable? And what are the things that we're doing that are scalable and good and fit into it? I would argue that's an example of something you want to further explore, and it is. As opposed to, well, not as opposed to. So, for example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was at Lower Merion High School, and the 10th grade team of teachers were doing awards for the kids. And they invited me to come and see it, and I went and looked at the awards. One of the awards was the Bulldog Reader Award. This was for 10th graders who read beyond what the teacher had assigned, and there were a number of awards. I'm sitting there going, this is really pretty cool. And I think Harridan has, Sizzle Awards, and so there's different places for these kinds of things. I'm not sure that has to be brought to scale, but that has to be considered as part of a good thing to do. So one's scalable, one may not be, because the very fact that it was small and teachers did it themselves, you ought to leave that alone and not try and force everything into it. And I think that back and forth is what needs to happen in terms of what do we have, but what are we missing?
And and I'll stop talking in a second, as a parent, I feel like my 6th grader is ideal for that experience. It's a very student-driven learning, and she's kind of tragically disappointed she didn't get into communicate, but hopefully there's opportunities to behave or act like that in the regular program.
Sure.
Whereas my son would probably be horrified by that program, and therefore I'd love to make him experience it in a smaller version, just so he's pushed in a certain way. So I just think that it'd be great if everyone had the opportunity to do it in some way, shape, or form.
We'll make sure he sees this.
No,
And I've written down me search. I think that's.
I'm actually glad, because I was actually going to bring up the interdisciplinary programs as well. And every time at this time of year, I start getting, phone calls.
Yeah.
And it's very funny
right.
because I was telling somebody that I swore that it actually was a real lottery, because I knew board members, kids who hadn't gotten in, and I didn't even know about yours. I know other board members. I was like, no, it really is a lottery. But, one of the issues that keeps coming up is that kids who haven't been in it before don't get weighted in the next year's lottery. And I would like to actually bring that back up for consideration, because I know that wasn't done when Welsh Valley only had 7th grade and then introduced 6th grade, because they were worried that people wouldn't apply for the 6th grade program because the 7th grade program was so popular. But I think we're kind of beyond that at this point. And, the issue is that, people students and parents are hungry for this kind of program, and we have more kids in them who want it. So any way we could make it, even if it isn't the same program, but this idea of sort of how do you have more sort of thematic, critical thinking kinds of the kinds of things that we all have been talking about. Since you talked about that, I'm going to use the opportunity to bring up another issue, which is, first of all, I thought this was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. It's really exciting to hear how far things have gone. In terms of getting the student's voice, and I'm glad to hear you're doing these focus groups. I thought about it a lot of times, and I don't know that this is the case in what you've done, but a lot of times when we're trying to get the student voice, we go to the student government kids, and and those kids have really lots to say and are incredibly articulate and smart kids. But I was thinking, would it be possible, again, sort of, thinking in the middle school experience right now, at Welsh Valley, they have a forum. I know that BC must have something equivalent to that, right? That being able to get the entire school during like a forum to start thinking about how would we want to see, somewhere we could get the entire school involved potentially. It was just an idea, and I'm sure there are ways of thinking about. I don't know how to think about that in elementary school, but I'm sure Dr. Hart would have fabulous ideas. But just to be able to get, as many kids involved, and also, the kids who we sometimes need to hear about are the kids who are maybe not as engaged in school. So, just some ideas.
So a couple things. One, going back to the interdisciplinary, no, I think it's a good point, but there's two things I want to say about it. One, here's the real challenge, and it's a good challenge. The strategic plan is an amazing document, and we are a public school system. We are an inclusive public school system. This task is easy if you're a parochial school or a private school or a charter school. You develop who you are and you say, if you don't want to come here, go somewhere else. You don't want to buy into this, go somewhere else. What makes us who we are is we say, no, you get to come here and we have to figure out how to work with you. So even in the interdisciplinary, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that some kids may not respond in its current way, but guess what? We have traditional programs that some kids may not respond in, and we shouldn't just stop saying, well, you're not responding here, so there's that's just life. So if it's the essence of it, it's good to see connections in what we learn, and it's good to have those kind of critical thinking things to do, not idiosyncratically in our education, but throughout, then I think we have an obligation to bring it to scale in ways that are more accessible to a wider variety of kids. The student voice of the non-aggressive elected student is absolutely...
Aggressive elected? Why did you say that?
Well, I have to tell you, two of my favorite activities as superintendent is I meet with those kids in the student government, and I walk away after an hour and a half thinking, this is really cool. These are tremendous kids. I haven't done it yet this year. I'll do it next year. I often call back alumni who have been out of the school system for at least their second year out of the school system, and I bring them back and I say, you've been out for a while. How did we do? You've experienced college or work or so forth. How did we do for you? The hardest group of kids to bring back are the kids who didn't particularly like being there in the first place. And I get a whole bunch of kids who are like, you did great, I'm wonderful, I was a star then, I'm a star now, and so it's a struggle. I've done it in a lot of different ways. I do think we have to be much better at giving voice to the kids who are silent for most of their time. And that's a struggle, but it's one worth struggling over.
Yeah, and if I could speak to that as well, in terms of the sampling and the selection for those students, We did work with the counselors and the building administrators to identify specific groups of students, including some of those who they felt would speak and have a voice, but maybe were not as engaged in learning. It was not selection in terms of student government. It was working with the counselors, looking in terms of groups of students, who do we want to be present? And that included both, students who receive special education services, students who may not be as engaged. I think of middle school, and I explained it to my counselors, middle school is extremely social. So looking at those different groups and making sure that you have representation. So that's how we selected them. Okay?
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Driscoll?
Thank you for the
then Ms. Pollard.
presentation. I just have you may not be able to answer this question, but I'm going to pick on the elementary schools because we have 6 of them. Well, they're all excellent. They're also slightly different. Just, they're different in how they perceive things. They're different in principles. They're not identical. And I've heard many people tell me that they kind of like that. They like the fact that the school fits, in a sense, who goes there. So my question for some of this is, can some of this be malleable when we get there to say, this might work at this elementary school in this form, but if we're going to go to this elementary school, it shouldn't be a carbon copy. We should tweak it a little bit or something. So just try to get some, and I pick on the elementary schools because there's 6 of them versus the middle schools and the high school, which is 2. Just this diversity amongst the schools we have.
No, I agree. That's why I say when I see some of the things that are happening in pockets, I'd say, this got to be this way because a group of teachers designed it, they thought through it, it was good for them. It should stay with them. They can have some freedom. I gave some examples. I was visiting Belmont Hills. Dr. Hart said, you got to see the DOTS thing, the DOT activity. Wake up back there. And it was a particular activity by her guidance counselor for transition for 5th graders going into the middle school. Now, we may not, and I get the sense that all of the 5th grade counselors do some level of transition. I don't want to get to the point where I say, oh, I saw a really great DOT activity. That's going to be the legislated activity for transition. I think that would be wrong. But you don't want a situation where there's strong transition programs in one school and nothing in another. That's not right either.
Mrs. Pollard?
Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really good. One of the things that made the strategic plan such a wonderful document is the inclusiveness of students and parents, and we've been talking about the student's voice, and I was looking at all the teams, and I apologize for my ignorance, but most of the teams, or all of the teams where I was looking at names were names of teachers and administrators that I know, and if there are students and or parents and or other people involved in the teams, it wasn't reflected. And so I think if we could have, if there are other people that make up these teams, then I feel we should know that, who they are. That's number one. And number two, sometimes we spend so much time trying to focus on how to implement stuff. It takes a long time to implement the things. And I was just noticing that Dr. Hart, and I'll just say the markers place, where the children are learning what their learning process is. And I know Laura was saying that she would like her son to be given, some things. But, is there a way that you can, while you're trying to implement what's the good sources, have some pieces being implemented already? I hope I didn't confuse you.
No, I heard two questions. One about who makes up the teams that we've identified for our pathways for the 15-16 school year. And the names that are listed is a pretty complete listing. I hope I didn't leave anyone out because I wouldn't want to not recognize someone. So that is a listing, and some of the teams do have a parent representatives, student representatives, though not all of the teams have that representation. And I think initially when we did pull the teams together, thinking about being in an implementation phase, that the work is something that, you know, as implementers in the district, that we're, you know, owning that process, that's the work we have to create and manage and implement. And the idea of the steering committee that we report back to, which we've done twice this year, that is a representation of parents, students, everyone, that we would make sure that we were continuing to check in with that group as our barometer, and making sure that we are staying, you know, true to the plan. So the intent, and as I think Mr. Potton mentioned earlier, it's been really valuable for us to do that check-in, because when we initially sort of oriented to the transformative curriculum, there was some questions by students saying, well, I think you've lost us in this process, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen, whether it was perceived or real. And I hope that it was just perceived, because it wasn't our intent to lose the students. But that's when we came back and wanted to make sure that, you know, with representation of all the pathways, that we're really clear that we're not losing one of those areas in service of another, but there's so much interplay between them that we can find, you know, ways to identify specifically students where your voice is and where it can filter into all of the pathways. So I just wanted to share that while we have pathway teams identified for this year, we certainly are very mindful of the voices that, you know, informed the plan initially and continue to inform our work. On the other question of whether, you know, as we move forward, and you're right, I mean, implementation is like a really heavy lift and can take a long time. The idea of piloting ideas, prototyping ideas that we don't even officially prototype or happen, and that's what's really great about this school district, is that we have a lot of innovators already in the classroom that begin really good work that we, you know, can take a snapshot of and can come back and say, you know, this is reminiscent, or this kind of looks like this big idea that we have, and let that move forward, certainly under, you know, the guidance of the principal at the building level, who will then share those activities with us. So it's never meant to say, you know, everything stops until it gets approved through the process. All of these good things can you know, continue to coexist and not, you know, certainly hinder our implementation plans in any way. Did you want to add something? Sure.
In terms of our movement and thinking about implementation at the same time we're ideating and thinking about what could this look like, for me, I think there's a metaphor that helps me kind of make sense of the process. And I always think of the idea of tacking. And so, you know, in the ancient world, when sailors didn't have navigational tools to get to where they needed to go, they used a central point, usually the North Star, to figure out how to navigate. But if a ship set out directly for the North Star, if everyone got on board the ship and said, North Star all the way, we're moving until we get to the North Star, that ship would get tragically, terribly lost, because the currents are going to buffet that ship. And so to recognize as sailors that there were going to be these natural currents, and they could fight against those currents, or instead they could opt to tack their progress. So by tacking their progress, they hold that guiding light, what the strategic plan is giving us, and then they move forward and then have to reorient, because we know the curve is going to, we know the waves of the ocean are going to inform us, and then re-tack back, and then begin to move forward again, and then re-tack back. And so a lot of the processes that we've talked about this year, things like the notion of, you know, makerspace and maker mentality in the elementary school, that's one of those small tacks. The idea of thinking about these ideas about interdisciplinarity in terms of program, as well as in terms of thread, as well as in terms of project to meet kids' needs. That's one of those tacks going forward, to think about the idea of computer science not just as a new course or a new curricular element, but to think about it as something that could be threaded through all of the curricular experiences our students have. That's another tack. And so as we're moving in and out of those different experiences, I think that's how we're moving forward, yet continually checking ourselves against that North Star that is the strategic plan. So for me, that metaphor helps me make sense of how we stay centered, how we stay reflective, but also how we move forward. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, everybody. It's starting to coalesce. I think I'm guessing a lot's going to happen at that June 29th, 30th meeting and through the summer, and I'm looking forward to hearing some specifics about what we're going to try and what we're going to do maybe in the fall. That's sort of an exciting concept. We're still up here, and I can't wait till we're like down in the dirt. When you first presented transformative curriculum, you said dynamic curriculum based on the PA core, and I felt like that was sort of an oxymoron, and and then as I was thinking about this, I was also thinking what I'm about to say is also going to sound almost as oxymoronic as that, but so. A lot of what you've described is a real richness and depth and focus, and you talked about students specializing and things like that, and that's fabulous. I mean, I think you give a student something that they really love, and they'll run with it and learn all kinds of stuff in the process. However, what they learn is probably not going to show up on a standardized test that they have to take. And so part of redefining the success of our students is, and something that I think we have to give a lot of thought to as we move forward, is we may end up doing really fabulous things in terms of educating the students that are going to make us, based on our testing scores, not look as fabulous as we are. I think there's the potential for I don't know what the word is, a pressure back and forth between the two issues. In the end, our students, whether we like it or not, are going to still have to take the SATs, and our students are still going to expect to do well on the SATs. And so we can't abandon some of the things that we do that prepare them for the SATs. But similarly, I just love the idea of letting them grab a topic and run with it. So I think for me, one of the big obstacles, one of the big challenges of implementing this plan is going to be finding a way that we can push our students to really learn, and I'll use the word authentic because that's like the hot word these days, but in an authentic way, but still be able to succeed in the more traditional ways, because our community is going to expect that we've prepared our students for those things. So I don't know that I need much feedback other than reassurance that, we're thinking about this dichotomy as we're moving forward.
So we agree. I live in this place, it's called the real world, and you're all here with me. And so we understand that algebra is not going away, phonemic awareness isn't going away, and nor should it. And so curriculum is largely a delivery system. It's how we get it across, whether it's a one-room schoolhouse whether it's visuals or whether it's through technology. The issue is I don't think it has to be anything mutually exclusive. So, for example, when we look at time and space, one of the things that I've been talking about is we know that kids, even kids who are real good at math, never really grasp fractions. And so maybe what we do when we teach fractions is we do it for a week. And that's all you do. So you give kids a lot of different experience. Use your time and space differently so that you can grasp things and so that you give away some things while you do. I'm just giving an example of so the search is, how are we going to do that? At the same time, what's really important, I would argue, about a transformative curriculum is, one of the keys is we're preparing students for an unknown future, which is very different than the task that we've had in the past. And doing that in an inclusive structure rather than an exclusive one is a challenge. It's what we do.
I just want to push back a little bit on this, though, because the interdisciplinary program, these are not, first of all, the core is not the same thing as standardized testing. So the core is actually, in a lot of ways, more rigorous than, and more sort of in-depth and critical thinking than things we've seen in the past. And so, I mean, I agree with what you're both saying, but I also think it's putting up a little bit of a false dichotomy, because I think if kids are being trained in, in critical thinking as opposed to, say, rote memorization, that's likely they'll do better anyway on the standardized test, although I agree that they need to understand a fraction. So I think it's, it's not quite.
I don't necessarily disagree. I think that the experiences that you provide and the way you do it can be diverse, they can be creative, and it's not exclusive of, you got to know stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I've always argued if you teach a student creatively, they're going to do well on the test. You don't need to teach them the test. But and I think a lot of this stuff is a lot easier to implement on the K-8 level than on the high school level. High school becomes much more special. The classes become more specialized. The keystones are now going to be very specific. It's even in terms of American history. I mean, this is what we have to do. I remember there was a teacher at Harrington who was really interested in the Vietnam War, and so spent in his American history class, took a big chunk of time and really delved into the Vietnam War, and the kids came out really interested and enthused and excited, but then he kind of didn't quite get to Korea or whatever. Didn't quite give the same time to some of these other things. But so if the test includes the whole range, maybe those kids aren't prepared, but boy, do they understand all the issues that were involved. And seriously, serious critical thinking about why we go to war and what are the effects. Anyway, it's just an example. It's just, and all I'm suggesting is that we, as Bob said, is, we live in the real world and we've got to be able to balance both issues at once.
Thank you for the presentation again and the questions. And Dr. Everslog, we're going to move to your portion of the meeting.
Just want to note, everybody gave me a hard time because of the length of my slides, and I in and out earlier. No, not those.
Oh, before?
Yeah. So while Dr. Everslage is getting set up, I just wanted to also indicate that as this subject was brought up at board meetings and asked the superintendent, I asked Sean Hughes to delve into this because Mr. Hughes has been on a number of these committees because the grading system gets changed a number of times in school districts all over the country. It's one of the things we like to sort of go back and forth on. And this is not, this is an administrative regulation. So this isn't necessarily something the board has to vote on. What we're doing is, because we've come to the end of the year, this was first raised with the policy committee, and I think after this evening's meeting, what we'd like to do is, we don't normally do a board update that gets pushed out at the end of this meeting. We usually do it at the business meeting, but I've asked Mr. Young to push something out at the end of this meeting to let folks know that if they wish to speak about it, they should come to the next board meeting in June, lest anybody think we're rushing. On the other hand, if it's going to be implemented for next year, we really have to give folks a heads up now and start the process. So that's sort of the route at which we're taking. Scott? Who's standing in for Mr. Hughes?
I am pinch hitting for Mr. Hughes this evening. So thank you for your attention this evening, and thank you for those that have stayed around and been a part of the informing the secondary grading update that I'll be sharing this evening. I appreciate being scheduled in the 9:45 hour. That's usually the most exciting hour of the board meeting. This is the...
You're running out of time.
This is a review of, as Mr. Copeland said, the administrative regulations surrounding Policy 213, which is grading of student progress. And it's really one part of Policy 213. So Policy 213 covers a lot of areas. We're really focusing on the grading scale and grading calculations in particular. There has been a lot of history in the district since 2000 as far as revision of the grading practices that the district has implemented. Mr. Hughes was asked to lead this because he has had the good fortune of being involved in every aspect of this and has a great deal of historical perspective on this and has seen the ebbs and flows and different perspectives. So he really was a great person to lead this and has led a lot of conversations and dialogue with stakeholders throughout this process. The committee, with the last changes to the grading that the grading committee made were in 2009, and at that time made some recommendations for the district to review within 5 to 7 years, which of course we're now at the end of that, at the end of the 7th year after this, and we were encouraged to to review the current research on grading and assessment practices and policies at similar school districts, because there have been so many changes. Take a look at what districts have gone from either an 8-point range to a 10-point range, or changed what an A or an A plus would be in their districts. For example, the change that we made in 2009 was we had been on an 8-point scale. We maintained that 8-point scale, but added pluses. The district chose at that time not to add minuses to the scale. The recommendations were made to also review midterms and finals at the high school, which has been done and is done on an ongoing basis, and create some clarity and consistency for what constitutes a grade. And that certainly is something that we have been doing, but still have a lot of work to do in that area. This work was brought forth by a recommendation from Mr. Copeland, as he said, from some conversations that had occurred at Ask the Superintendent session, and asked us to look into what other districts are using, who is using a 10-point scale, who is reporting letter grades using pluses or minus, and are there any districts that are reporting strictly numerically. So Mr. Hughes led a group that did a lot of research over the past 6 months and looked at 40 schools in the area, 31 public schools, 7 local or independent schools, and 2 out-of-state public schools, similar to Lower Merion. And of the 31 local public schools, 27 used some type of range in the 90 to 100, or a 10-point scale, 90 to 100 range. Three of the 31 districts had a grade range that was similar to Lower Merion with an 8-point range, and one local high school uses local public high school uses numbers only. Of the independent schools and the 2 out-of-state public schools, 7 use a 10-point scale. One school doesn't use a numerical scale at all. It has standards-based. And of the 40 schools that are researched, 35 use both plus and minus, and 5 use neither plus or minus in the range scale. We also looked at the impact on colleges and universities, spoke to some admissions representatives, and we had some difficulty getting a clear answer from college admissions officers. They clearly wanted to have a specific profile for each school of the students that, who they were evaluating for admission. Did not specifically say that an 8-point scale would disadvantage a student. But we certainly know that if a student were to have a 91 in our current grading system, they would not fall in the A range, whereas another district that has a 10-point scale could fall in the A range. And that could have impact not only on optics, but could have impact on admissions, and certainly has some impact on financial aid or scholarships, some of which is based solely on students earning grades of A or above. So this is this was the last adjustment that was done in 2009 that I summarized earlier, moving from an 8-point scale to adding pluses. There was some adjustment as well to the GPA points for the pluses, as opposed to strictly the 4, 3, 2, 1 on the whole numbers that we had been using. So this information and the research was brought to focus groups that Mr. Hughes led. He met with the leadership teams of both high schools, also met with teachers and faculty at faculty meetings at both high schools, and went to visit with some middle school teachers as well, met with focus group of parents, and met with focus groups of students. And he not only shared the feedback and the research that I had just shared with you, but asked them several questions that are displayed here, as far as some options. All of the questions ending with if so, why? So would we keep the current system? Would we keep an 8-point system and add minuses? Would we employ a 10-point system? You can see the questions that were posed there. So a range of options that were presented to the focus groups. And these truly weren't, this wasn't a survey. These were focus group discussions, which, as we heard from some of our community participants this evening, through discussions and information that was shared, ideas were not only formed, but I think opinions were changed, and there was some emerging consensus that occurred. So these were the outcomes. These were the dates listed above that Mr. Hughes met with different groups. You can see that there was not much agreement on keeping the range scales as is. There is a tremendous amount of agreement about being aligned with other districts and private schools, and this was an area that many thought that was not worth being an outlier as far as grading systems aligned with other districts. The 10-point scale with no plus or minuses didn't gain a lot of ground. Some teachers did prefer that. There's a simplicity to that, but that didn't, amongst the stakeholder groups, carry a lot of weight. No pun intended. The 10-point range scale with pluses and minuses was the option that gained the most amount of consensus from teachers, students, and parents. That is the system that's aligned most closely with College Board, and you can see many of the other areas there were not agreement. Students did voice that if we went to a 10-point range, they still would prefer not to have the minuses, which is understandable from the student perspective. teachers and parents didn't fully agree with that. But there was still agreement that Lower Merion does implement a floor for students for their grade for the first half of the year, for the quarters 1 and 2 in a 4-quarter system. We do have a grade floor so that students, the purpose of the floor is that students that struggle early in the year don't get mathematically buried and have no chance of passing the course. So that's the purpose of the floor, and there is consistent agreement to maintain the floor. So as a result of this, there are 2 recommendations that we are making. The first is that we adjust the range and scale to the most commonly used letter grade percent and range scale that's listed below. That is aligned closely, not exactly with College Board, but it is identical with College Board up through the A plus to C range. As you can see, is directly aligned with College Board to C minus. I'm sorry. The part that's slightly different is College Board. Their lowest grade is a D at a 65. They don't have a D minus, and everything below a 65 is an F. There's no floor with the College Board. We are recommending that the range for A, B, C, and D is consistent with what would be a plus, a standard A, B, C, or D, or a minus. So we are recommending consistency amongst those three gradations within each letter grade. And we are recommending that the floor, because of the letter of where the F is, that the floor is established at 50. And then that the grading scale is, as far as pluses and minuses, is aligned so that the grade point averages also indicate the plus and minus would be affected with the student's grade point average comparably. The second recommendation, I think, is equally as important, and I think it's important to note that changing the grading scale is a technical change, and it's one that we make in the recommendation because we don't want our students to be disadvantaged in any way as they go through the college process and the application for scholarship process. But we would be fooling ourselves if we said that in and of itself is grading reform. We're not viewing that as grading reform. That's a technical change that should be done, that we're recommending should be done within a greater context. And our second recommendation is that we do, similar to what we heard in the strategic plan presentation, look at a more reflective and comprehensive feedback system for our students, where there is really important feedback provided to students on their learning and where that falls within grade reporting. Those two are obviously aligned, and to establish a district-wide grading philosophy, which we feel will help guide the other aspects of the policy, which we would want to revisit once that grading philosophy is established, grading philosophy and feedback system established. So those are our 2 recommendations. If the recommendations are supported by the board and administration to move forward, there is some impact, obviously. The timing of this would be that we would have to make sure that we have appropriate communication with all stakeholders, parents and students. There is a technical end to this. We would have to review the calculations of the mathematical impact on some of the other aspects of schooling that currently rely on student grades. For example, honor roll, distinguished honor roll, criteria for valedictorian, salutatorian, GPA calculation, and then there's a technical end as far as setting up Power School and grade books. And if we were to move forward with this, we would recommend implementing it in a way similar to how we made grading changes in 2009, making it very clear to those to whom we report that there was a district grading scale for students prior to or up to this point, up to the end of the 15-16 school year, and a different scale for students of 16-17 and afterwards. And that we wouldn't go back and adjust grades retroactively for students that had been earned a grade under the previous system. So those are our recommendations. Are there Any questions?
I just wanted to, before the board, so what I'm recommending is that when does this get put on the television? So people, I mean, on the website? Tomorrow. So, well, I mean, the video. Yeah. Okay, so for anybody who sees it, I'm asking folks to comment in community comments, and then, of course, we'd have another opportunity to have a discussion next Monday, just so that there's some lag time, if this is the notion of the board.
A huge thank you to the administration for a very comprehensive process, particularly the reaching out to stakeholder groups and providing some very rich data for the board to consider. So just to reiterate Mr. Copeland's point, and again, thank you for the recommendations as well. We can have some conversation, deliberation here. And what we'll do at the business meeting on Monday, June 13th, is get a sense of the board. Because it's an AR, we don't officially vote. However, I think it's important, given the magnitude of such a decision in terms of the impact, and to the community comments that we received earlier today and throughout, as I anticipate, it'll be important, I think, to just get a sense of the board so that we have that on record going forward, much like was done in 2009. So at this time, I'll open it up for comments, discussion, if any board members so choose. Please, Dr. O'Leary.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and this was discussed at the policy meeting on Friday, so I don't want the public to think that this was the only discussion of the matter, but I just wanted to comment for those who might, the hundreds who watched the video on Thursday night, that I personally, and I think I speak for the rest of us, know that we're really interested in hearing what the public has to say on this matter, because I was around for the discussion last time, not on the board, but in the audience, and I remember that it was a very rich discussion with a lot of different perspectives, depending mostly on where your kid falls on the ADAP scale. So I really hope people weigh in and that we get a lot of feedback before we weigh in next week.
Please, Diane.
Thanks. Scott, could you describe what the transcript's going to look like for a current sophomore?
So a current sophomore would have their grades from 2014-15 and 2015-16 that would have the current grading scale that we have, and it would say this was the grading scale for students up to 2015-16, and it would be included on the transcript or in the attached profile that we send to universities. So the university, we send a transcript with a profile that has the grading scale, the programs we have offer, the AP offerings, and so forth. And then it would also say grades after this date. So after 2015-16 for the 2016-17 school year, 2017-18 school year, this was the grading scale, and then reported how the student did in those 2 years.
Thanks, Scott. I wonder if you could comment a little bit on the discussion involving whether to go away from numerical grades altogether and just use letter grades, like whether a child does A work or B+ work, and how the teachers and the members of the focus groups feel about that. Or if you could comment.
Can you repeat?
To go away from numerical grades altogether. In other words, just go directly to letter grades. I think that was one of the things that there was not an agreement on.
No, I think, in other words, a more college, so that you just get, everything is just graded A, B, C, D.
Exactly, right.
I think the problem, No, he's asking if no.
No, it wasn't.
But he's asking if that was a discussion that people had.
Right, I think one of the things, I see. So remove letter grades and then report only numerical grades. My question really was the opposite of that.
Yep,
in terms of, I don't know, there's been some discussion where with the 92-point scale where a child has a 91 and talks to a teacher, can you bump me up 1 point? And they say, no, I can't do that. But whether the child is doing A work or B+ work is, especially I was just curious if that had been discussed, because when the numerical grades, they're turned into letter grades, and then they're turned into the grade point average, correct?
Correct. So the numerical grade is earned but not reported on the transcript. It's just the letter grade that's reported on the transcript. So one of the considerations was, should just a numerical grade be reported and not a letter grade attached to it? So is that?
Mine was kind of an opposite, a different.
He's really,
but prior to 2009, the only thing, it was A, B, C, D, F. Actually, there was an E in an F, but no one ever gave out the E. But so you're correct me if I'm wrong. Your question is, why did we move on?
And I guess if you,
Dave, I think
sorry,
when I taught graduate school, you were always grading papers. I can't remember giving a test. So a kid got an A, or a student got an A, a B, and there were no numbers. Isn't that what you're saying?
Right. Well,
and what would happen is, I don't know how it works for others, but a student would look at me and say, I got 4 A's, 3 B's, a C, and a D. How did you give me a B? And because there's so much subjectivity in it.
Right.
And at the college or graduate school level, they just look at you and go, because I said so, and, life goes on. I know Dr. Gilbert is, doing that. But it would become, I would think, problematic at a high school level. That's his question. I think.
It is, but I think that whatever grade you give, the meaning behind that and students understanding the criteria that would lead up to that is the more important part. And
right.
So, in essence, recommendation number 2 is every bit as important as recommendation number 1, which is the final recommendation of really getting greater feedback. So I think the simplicity of just giving the single grade is a huge jump when you're talking numerically, because there is a numerical part, like Power School is operated numerically, and then it calculates it as a letter grade.
I didn't articulate my question very well at all. I withdraw the question, actually. It was just, I'm not feeling quite understood. But the question is, A work is A work, whether it's a 90 or a 92, in terms of, in some sense, I guess.
But I think the essence of what we're trying to say is, just the fact that, and the way that you asked it is exactly what's sort of bedeviling to us about this. We want to get something out there that's clear, that's concise, and it's consistent with practice, so that our kids are operating under the same kind of playing field as other kids. And then get to what we really care about, which is, how do we assess students? How do we give feedback to students? How does that process really aid in student learning? And unfortunately, this, no matter how perfected it is, somewhat detracts from it. Because we're not doing this for us, per se.
That's what I was trying to get to.
I agree.
Yeah, just a comment. Are we? And I agree with you that the number 2 piece is really the most important piece of all of this. But even if you have 3 teachers who teach Algebra 2, you have one teacher who goes strictly by your test grades. You have another teacher who has test grades, but then has points for homework and points for projects, and then you have another teacher who only gives you extra points if you need extra credit and you want to bump up to the next level. Are we going to try and sort of make that a little more, because one thing that happens when you get, the more variation, the more different striations you have in the grades, is that becomes a bigger issue, which teacher you end up getting and how they grade.
That's absolutely, you're exactly right, and that's why the importance of establishing a grading philosophy district-wide is really important, to say what is it that we grade, and how much do we value homework? How much it really speaks to whether you create a culture of compliance or whether you're grading learning. on a very grand scale. So, obviously you want your grading to represent what you believe in as an institution, and so formalizing that is I think important and will inform teachers in a way to inform their grading practices, which will benefit students. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think you might get more resistance there than you do on any changes we make to the.
Any further questions? Okay, so now we are at thank you, Dr. Everslot.
Sure.
We appreciate the presentation again. Is there any public comment? If so, please sign in with Ms. LaPera. You've already signed in, and I'm guessing the folks that are approaching know the drill.
Ruth Jenkin, Winwood. A couple of things. I felt that the presentation was filled with educational jargon and not specific enough, giving us an example of how you're going to use this process. For instance, if I was teaching the causes of the American Revolution, which I have done several times, I would bring in a corporate stamp and I would stamp everybody's homework and I would make them pay for that stamp that they got until I had a revolution in the classroom. And that would then understand the process of taxation without representation. I'd like to see some of this abstraction and philosophy actually kind of done in a concrete manner. We always need outcomes, and we need actions to get those outcomes. You have to identify what the outcomes are, and we all know that at the end of certain grades, you want them to be able to read, do a certain amount of math, etc., and you want them to understand how they got those answers, the process. I also think that the teachers have to buy into this, and if they are not part of the process and they don't understand how to take the same material and use it in the classroom, then nobody's going to buy into it. It's just going to be another educational philosophical position, and we've seen them come down the pike year after year. That's my main thought. The other thought was the metaphor of the North Star was very confusing to me.
Hi again, Harry Hummel. I'm making up for lost time on my comments. I'd just like to say that in listening to the report, I thought there was a really deep, penetrating insight that I'd like to just reiterate, and it was something that Brian Cote said. I'm trying to understand why kids don't understand something. Maybe professional educators are all over that and they think about that a lot, but my kids have been struggling with fractions for years too, and every year I teach them again, and they continue not to understand it. And I wonder if there is a way of measuring or understanding, why kids are falling off, which ditch they're going into, and to improve the educational process using that as a system of measure. I had, when I was in grad school, I had a professor of crystallography, which is this really arcane mathematical field. And he was an okay scientist, but he was outstanding at understanding people's questions when they were wrong and screwing himself around to where they were and then leading you back out so that you really understood it. And that's a level of critical thinking from a teacher. That's a lot to ask. Only one who was really great at that. But when why is the kid not getting it? I thought that was a really interesting insight. And, perhaps something hard to measure, hard to evaluate, but I think a goal to strive for when you have a quality and a scope of education that you have in the system. Thanks.
Thank you. Is that it? All right. So thank you for coming. We will now adjourn. Board business meeting this coming Monday, June 13th, 8 p.m. in this room.